All right, here we go. Welcome back. Still talking about culture. Let's begin today talking about folk culture. And we're going to talk about folk culture and we're going to talk about popular culture. And we're going to start looking at how culture begins to shape civilizations, how it begins to shape groups of people, and how identities are formed that will eventually, historically, become nations. And then from nations to states. And we'll get into all that in the next unit. But now that we are living together and now that we are in one location for extended periods of time, we begin to develop things that we will see as being us, intrinsically us. So here we go. Folk culture, first and foremostly, is the practice of some behavior by a small group in a specific location. It is not transmitted across the globe or across the country or across the continent. It is something that one group of people does. Now, remember, because of independent invention, some other cultures may have the same behaviors, and remember, geography plays a part in that too. So they're doing their own thing in this culture, and they believe they're doing their own thing. But the main thing to take out of this is that the purpose of this behavior is not to share it with others. Just keep that in mind. Now, 5 factors about folk culture that are kind of essential. One, it's pretty isolated because once you start coming in contact with people, you get, I agree, you get diffusion, and that culture is going to shift. It's going to change. It's going to evolve over time. It is often dependent on the environment, and this goes back to earlier in the unit when we were talking about environmental determinism. Usually practiced by a small group of homogenous people. Their sameness allows this to develop and evolve. Again, once you start not being so sameness, your culture is not going to be the same. And as I previously alluded, it is isolated in multiple hearts. So different places, independent from one another, are kind of coming up with the same thing, like the idea of marriage being one of those. And there's a lot of anonymity when these things start. We don't know where all these traditions began necessarily. We don't know when they began, and we don't necessarily know which cultures were the first. We just know that they happened. So this is folk culture, very specific to individual groups. And there are 3 ways that we can talk about these types of groups. Okay, so our first way are indigenous cultures. Let me move me. There we go. Indigenous cultures are, whoops, indigenous cultures are a group made up of the original inhabitants. Okay, natives tend to be what comes to mind immediately, whether it be in this country, or New Zealand, or the Aborigines in Australia, or groups in South America. Those tend to be who we think of, or Africa, when we think of indigenous people. And this group are the original inhabitants of these places, as the slides say. And even though they live, I'm just going to use this for an example, even though they live in Nigeria, they're a Nigerian group, their behaviors and their culture runs counter to the national culture of what it means to be Nigerian. Okay, so they're very, in America, outside Native Americans, you would say the Amish would be the closest to that, but they're not indigenous, so not the best example. Cherokee, Navajo, Arapaho, Sioux, any tribe still alive, Catawba, the Lumbee. Sure, any tribe that's still alive in America would be considered an indigenous culture. And then we have folk cultures, okay, our region of folk culture. This is a small rural group living in relative isolation from other people. This is a better example of the Amish culture, or the early like beginning stages of the Mormon culture. I think you can make the assessment it was a folk culture region because they believe that Jesus came to America, to upstate New York, or the Messiah, came to upstate New York, and they had their beliefs, and they were chased all the way across the country and died and paid for those beliefs. But their culture is different from other Protestant cultures. It is, and so um, if you if I'm wrong, then I would hope that any Mormons in class would mention it in comments politely, but mention it in comments and steer me right, because I don't want to misinform. But I think that the Amish are an easier example, but I think it's safe to say that the Mormons could also fit that mold. And then finally, subcultures, and these groups are within the dominant group. They share some of the same things from the dominant group, but they have distinctive values, norms, languages, and material cultures. Like certain things matter to them differently than others. I mean, think about all the different subcultures in the high school. I mean, there are dozens, and that's not hyperbole. There are dozens of subcultures that tend to value different things within the same body of a high school, that speak a different language, that the terminology is a different thing altogether, and that certain material things matter more than to other people. So a subculture is part of the main culture, but they kind of have their own thing. They kind of go their own way. And there are plenty of examples throughout the history of mankind about um, subcultures. Now, and then again, if times were normal, we would do this. We would think about folk cultures and subcultures and make examples of them. We would think about that, whether it be in America or in North Carolina or in Raleigh or in Sanderson High School or in any high school. What would a subculture look like? What would folk culture regions look like? I named two. There could be more, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Now we're going to look at folk music. So what we're going to look at now are the different subsets. There's folk music, and excuse me. And so folk music is just that. It is music composed by unknown composers. Usually it's oral tradition that's put to music. It contains important events of a cultural region, of a cultural group: birth, death, marriage, customs, and I would argue the most important part is that they're lesson based or moral based, and they teach future generations about the culture, so the culture stays alive moving forward. So these are the bases of folk music. This is the premise and why we have it and what it is. And if you think about it, just looking at these things, what regions in America are you more likely to find folk culture, or folk music, excuse me, what regions in other countries are you more likely to find it? Which groups, which cultural groups or ethnic groups would you be more likely to hear this type of music? Um, and if you think about it, if you can think of who they are in America, then chances are you can think about which other types of groups would exist in other countries. And that's, again, that process of seeing how things are local and global all at the same time. This are the lyrics, and obviously now translation does funny things. And when we get the language, you'll understand why choosing a Vietnamese song is very interesting. But this is the translation of a song. This was, and notice that it's talking about farming and about the tradition and the importance of crops and farming to the Vietnamese people. Again, I'm sure it's much prettier in Vietnamese, but through translation and no music here, it's an awkward sounding thing. But it tells a story. It has importance. It's not just, hey, life's great. Now, in America, there are certain regions and certain types of folk music, and they have certain, well, styles, obviously, mainly because of the groups that create the music, but also stories, because the stories are relative to the region and when they're told. Like in the North, there are ballads, and ballads are English. And if you know anything about world history, European history, during the Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, there were bards who just would walk around singing and telling stories. Telling stories by song is nothing new. We're just Oops, we're just moving it. Sorry, we're just bringing it here to America. Uh, so that's up north. The fiddle is a featured instrument. The fiddle, not an American instrument. Uh, Fife and drum bands are popular. That just conjures up the Patriot and other Revolutionary War type looking things. Um, in the South and in the Appalachian regions, going west of Texas, this is where country music has its roots. This is its origins. This talks about the hard life for these people, the trials and travails of being in the mountains in the 16 1700s in America in the colonies and trying to survive and the hardships that come along with it, especially when you think about how such a large number of these people were immigrants and the struggle and why they left their country and what it means to leave people behind. The Western songs, the songs of Western expansion, are cowboys and farmers and river people and gold seekers. So those songs are more about the land or the opportunity, and they're much different. And then finally, the um, the black songs, the slave songs, the that were used partly as maps, as some of you know, but also partly to share their experience and communicate with one another and to keep what they went through alive to future generations. Because remember, if you're a slave, you're probably not literate, um, which means reading and writing is a difficult thing. But song, we know, song is part of. There have been songs for as long as there have been people. There have been songs. So it's an excellent way to keep these things alive, and it's also how we got the narratives out together. And from the slave songs from the South, we get the blues. Um, So there you go. Now it doesn't mention jazz because, well, for one thing, jazz is a 20th century creation, and for another, uh, jazz I don't think qualifies as folk music. But we could always discuss that at a later date. All right, now um, as far as examples of folk songs that you know, I mean, heck, "Ring Around the Rosie" is a folk song. Not Happy Birthday. Um, but songs that are in a particular region, songs that are in a particular area, songs that you would only hear in the South, not in the North, or vice versa, those would be folk songs. So um, think of our songs in a particular country that are only for that country. You could almost make the argument that national anthems are folk songs. That gets into, is that the culture of the people? All right. Now, folk architecture, believe it or not, remember going back to the beginning of culture, what defines a culture? And using my Moana example, the environment dictates how you evolve and how you adapt. If you don't have trees, your structures aren't made of trees. If you don't have stone, your structures aren't made of stone. That's just the way it is when your civilization is beginning. So architecture is vernacular. In other words, it is based upon what is readily available in a local region. Just like vernacular language is the local language, vernacular architecture is the structure and the building based upon materials in that region. Therefore, it's folk. All right, and we have some things associated with folk housing. Folk housing is both culturally and environmentally influenced, as the previous slide said. Folk housing is often based on resources available, which we discussed, and if the environment is the same, then regardless of where the cultures live, so in other words, if it's a tropical climate in a tropical region, in a tropical environment, whether it be South America, Southeast Asia, um, Africa, regardless, you're going to see the same materials in structures because that's what's there. And then, probably in a lot of cases, similar structures because the weather and the environment is going to shape what the best type of structure is. Okay, and we'll see some examples here in a second. All right. Now, types of materials used, really simple. Thatching, and you think of thatched roofs in England or in the north of Europe, basically. They do an excellent job of keeping out the rain, surprisingly. Now, unfortunately, it is grass, so things are living in it, but there's always a trade off. And it's readily available. That's what they had, so that's what they used. mud or brick and start thinking about adobe, or in the southwestern United States or Egypt or other parts of the world. So you don't have trees, you don't have other things, but you have dirt, and that's what you're going to use. And then finally, sod. So if you're living in the Shire, which this always reminds me of, sod is just that. It's grass with dirt. And you can build a nice little hobbit house or other house here with sod. Now, it may not look appealing, but if you've ever had a crawl space, and if you have a house with a crawl space and you're ever locked out of your house in the winter, that's where you go. If you're ever locked out of your house in the summer, if you want, that's where you go. Don't mind the spiders. Because it's always going to be warmer than the air in the winter, and it's always going to be cooler than the air in the summer. So it's a nice moderate place to live that you could actually temperature control, because I don't see a chimney. But that's what they have available, so that's what they use. Or timber. If you got wood, use wood. Or stone. Again, now, we know that some places that built stone structures did not have stone nearby. Moot point. It's got to be close enough by to be worth the effort. Okay, so if you have stone, you're going to use stone. If you have a quarry, you're going to carve and blast from a quarry, or carve and bring that stone to where you want to work. Now, vernacular housing in the United States. The materials are irrelevant because it's America, but the type of structure built matters based upon where the structure is built, and that's how they get their names. And again, if you have taken any kind of interior design or any kind of housing class, your input would have been lovely here. All right. Excuse me. New England style, there's salt box, two chimney, Cape Cod, front gable, and wing. These are the only ones we're going to talk about today, just because. Salt box house is just that. It looks like a box. It looks like a house where salt is kept, because back in the day, salt would be kept and distributed to you. The two chimney house, which my lovely face is blocking, there it is, aptly named because look, two chimneys. Whoops. Oop. The Cape Cod house, although this house is not a Cape Cod. If you've ever seen a Cape Cod, you would know that this is not a Cape Cod. But perhaps, no, there's no point in getting my stylus out for this. None of this is a Cape Cod. This is, let's go back. All right. That's the wrong, no, not a Cape Cod. Bad example. I'll find you a better example. That's, no. I gotta change that slide. And then finally, a front wing and gable. Anybody out there in the housing world know? Okay, here's your wing, and here's your gable. There you go. Front wing and gable. What could be easier? All right, moving on with that part. Now we have other types of houses. We have, let me go up here. In the Middle Atlantic, we have the I house and the Swiss German barn house. Again, the Middle Atlantic, that's Pennsylvania, New Jersey, okay, where there were a lot of Germans. And then in the lower Chesapeake, that's Virginia. That's the southeastern coast of Virginia. And we have the steep roof house. Here we go. There's your I house. That's right, the International House of House. I guess it kind of looks like an eye with the two chimneys and the body in between. And then here is our barn house, because, barn. And all right, so part 3, popular culture. My favorite section in all the PowerPoints this guy ever made, and you will know shortly why. Like today, you'll know why. All right, so that's folk culture. We did not get into all the examples of the housing. It's not a big deal. If you are feeling cheated, then by all means go look it up and convince me that I should add them to the PowerPoint. All right, popular culture. Boop. Here we go. Popular culture. Okay, we're going to look at the introduction. Whoops. We're going to look at the introduction to popular culture. We're going to look at the causes of cultural diffusion. So what causes popular culture to diffuse? And then the important one, the impacts of popular culture. So what does popular culture do to the places to which it diffuses? All right. So first we're going to define it, and then we're going to go into everything about why it is what it is, just like we did with folk culture. All right. Popular culture. What is popular culture? Popular culture is made up of a large heterogeneous societies that share certain habits. So typically, if it's from a country that's very diverse, very large, and not maybe has a willingness, but it doesn't bother them that it's shared. They want to share what they do. They want other people to feel what they would argue the benefit of their culture. That is popular culture. Notice it's a heterogeneous society because back at folk culture, that's a very homogenous group, the same people, the same people, the same people. This is different peoples, and you get that diffusion, and you get a whole different kind of thing, and then off it goes. The traits of popular culture. All right. Now, it is urban based. It is typically in industrialized or developed stage 3, stage 4 countries. It is a diverse group of people practicing a singular thing, which is really kind of cool if you think about it. And we know who created it. The origins are easy to find. The bottom one's the coolest one to me, that you can have a wide variety of people who buy into this and see this as something that's worth doing. That's cool. Now, this does not mean that it can't be from a rural part of a city or a rural part of a country, but typically rural areas are more homogenous if you think about it. Whether that be, and also remember too that homogeneity and heterogeneousness aren't just color or culture or ethnicity. There are different types of cultures. Remember, there can be a culture of wealth or so. Just because people are living in an urban base doesn't mean they're not liberal, doesn't mean they're not of a different color, doesn't mean there can be a whole different reason, a whole different culture in an urban area, which is why, or excuse me, in a rural area. Sorry about that. Which is why, even though this says urban based, that doesn't mean that there can't be some fantastic cultural phenomenon that comes out of a rural part of a heterogeneous place. That's all I'm trying to say. All right, here it is. There it is right there, right here. This is why I love this slide, because that right there is the U2 stage from their 2009 tour. This came to Raleigh, and in fact, if this was Raleigh, I know it's not, but if this was Raleigh, Mr. Story, was right there. I was right there. It was so amazing. Anyway, the only bad thing was all the cool things this thing did, because all this lit up and this turned colors and it shot lights out of this big thing on the top. I didn't get to see it because I was underneath with 3,000 other people. All right. Now, popular music is written for the sole purpose of lots of people hearing it. Okay, it may very well tell a story. It may very well talk about the group's culture or something that matters to the group or the individual or the composer. It may very well. I think Beethoven's Third Symphony was dedicated to Napoleon. And then he saw what happened. But regardless of the subject or the content of the music, they want everybody to hear it, and that's what makes it popular music. They want it to be popular. Remember, pop is people, going back to your world history stems, and they want as many people as possible to hear their music, which is why they give it to you for free if you have automatic downloads on. That's also why they're the greatest band in the world. Okay, enough of that. All right, we could just stay on this slide forever. We really could. We just could. We could just stop right here, and I could just right here. U2 and Disney. I could teach this whole class. All right, anyway. Now, popular clothing is developed by a particular person. And this is interesting. here, okay, if this were a folk entity, if this were a folk phenomenon, oops, sorry, then the the fabric or the materials available would be much more important, but it's not. Popular clothing is based upon what that one individual here thinks you want to wear, and that's what drives their design. They're because they think this is what more people are going to want to wear. They don't care what it's made from. They just want people to wear it, and that's what makes it popular clothing. Now, what other cultural elements could we consider for popular culture? That's a pretty cool question, actually. So, what other elements are there that we could consider for popular culture? And again, these questions that come up, if they really, really bug you, or if there's something you really want to talk about, post those. We can discuss them. We can meet whenever we'll figure it out. I'll give you passwords and codes and we'll meet and we can discuss this because I want you to ask your questions, whether here or in on Canvas or wherever or whatever medium you're using. Ask questions. Nothing gets fixed if you don't ask questions. All right, now, what causes popular cultural diffusion? The same things that cause any diffusion. People move. People move. Someone tells you, hey, eat this, like a Popeye's chicken sandwich. I still haven't had one. Now, one thing that allows popular culture to move to other places is technology. This is a cell phone repair shop in India. And then there's another reason why it's in India. There's also another reason why your call center goes to India. And when we get to language, see if you can figure out why. But communication technology allows culture to transfer, to distribute to other places, to diffuse to other places, because you can talk to the entire planet. Again, okay. Travel technology. The planet has not changed size since the Greeks figured out its size. But time distance compression, ooh, it's a unit one word, but time distance compression, because of communication and because of travel, allow ideas and people and material cultures to move more rapidly amongst each other. I think this goes 200 miles an hour. Yeah, I'd ride that. Globalization, the fact that American products are sold overseas because of transportation, because of communication. We have the action of globalizing things. Brands are everywhere. This is a really cool looking Coca-Cola shop in China. I'm not gonna lie to you. That's really, really cool. Um, so Coke is a world brand. It's everywhere. Except, well, it might be in Russia now. But a little fun fact. There's a book called The History of the World in Six Glasses. And they talk about six different types of drinks and how those six drinks are part of the fabric of the history of the world. And the last drink is Coca-Cola. And so it's soda, it's cola. And during the Cold War, Coca-Cola would not sell its soda to communist countries, but Pepsi didn't care. um, Pepsi was, they're in competition. They're trying to get market share. They need customers. So they sold to Russia and it was all good. So when I was in the Navy, I had a Pepsi shirt that was in Russian. It was kind of cool. Mass production and industrialization. We can build anything more quickly. So, whoops. This is an automobile assembly line. So the products that we want other people to have, we can get out more quickly. And remember, the more quickly you can build them, if the transportation is better and the communication is better, and we can get more of them out there, they're less expensive. And the less it costs, the more hands you can put it in. All right, now that's all great, but obviously, popular culture isn't viewed as being cool by everybody. So what are some of the consequences? What's the bad stuff? What could possibly go wrong or be wrong about popular culture? Who doesn't want a Big Mac? Now, how would popular culture adversely affect local cultures, climate, and natural resources? It's an excellent question. I actually like this question. We may have to discuss. We may have to have a meet and discuss this question. I love that question. Actually, you know what? When we're back in school, May the 18th, because I'm an incurable optimist, we're going to talk about that. So somebody remind me. Thanks. All right. Now, one thing that is a bad thing, about popular culture is this idea of cultural imperialism. Um, it is a well-known fact that every 4 hours, a new one of these opens up across the globe. A new McDonald's opens up every 4 hours, and that's great. That's great if they pay attention to the local culture and they are responsive and respectful to the local culture. But if they pull a McDonald's in India and decide that when they open their doors in India, they're still selling quarter pounders, um, you're going to get this. You're going to get a conflict with ethnic culture. Okay, you're going to get that as a problem. The fact that it serves everyone, that it hires everyone, that it doesn't care where you are socially stratified, that it doesn't care your gender. It wants everybody to eat their stuff, to listen to their stuff, to wear their stuff. That's problematic to some places in the world because they feel their culture is being cast aside. They're being sort of hierarchically assimilated from an outside source in a way. And that meets with resistance. And this is part of, if we can go all geopolitical here for a second, this is part of the reason for the disdain of America and other parts of the world. This idea that we're just going to drop our stuff on you and you have to eat it without any sort of care for what might be more appreciated there. And now, over the last 20 years, I think we've gotten a bit more responsive. Smaller companies have, and certain groups have gotten more responsive, but it's still a problem. Another problem of material culture or popular culture is the idea of a uniform landscape. Everything looks the same. Every mall looks the same. Whether it be the streets of South Point was the first one, and now that seems to be a trend where shopping centers and malls are look more like open streets. The Cameron Village type model, which, by the way, Cameron Village, oldest mall in Raleigh. All right, second oldest mall in North Carolina, I think. I think the one in Asheville is the oldest mall in North Carolina. But having everything look the same, the fact that, well, anyway, this is so funny because there are stores that no longer exist. But shopping centers look the same, and signs look the same, and big box stores look the same, or neighborhoods where everybody has to have the same mailbox. That's a uniform landscape. Our houses seem to all look the same. That's a uniform landscape, and that's icky. And some people don't like it. I don't like it. But Cary has, I think they have a sign restriction. That's what the signs can look at. Washington, D.C., nothing can be taller than the Washington Monument. In Paris, nothing can be taller than the Eiffel Tower. Again, going back to before, that kind of makes sense since the guy designed the cities, but still. Another issue with popular culture is, yes, the overuse of natural resources to produce your phone or your electric car. Oh, the irony. This is deforestation in Madagascar. That's right, all the lemurs are gone. King Julian, gone. But to produce the goods to sell everywhere, you're going to have to use natural resources. It's just a fact, okay? So that's another problem, that in order to progress and to get your stuff into the hands of as many people as possible, there are consequences. And then finally, pollution. One of the interesting outcomes of COVID-19 is there's less of this in Wuhan because the factories aren't running. And I'll bet you if they do studies of America during these 2 months, our air looks better too. Although Americans don't seem to be staying home like other countries because, well, America. Um, but pollution is a byproduct of deforestation in two ways. One, the industrialization and the factories building the stuff to sell. And then two, the loss of trees that would usually clean the air to do the things to sell. But then the third part of the pollution gets more into, well, one of the units that we won't get to this year, but it gets more into unit 6 with how countries become independent and successful and they develop and how and to keep up and to be competitive right away, you're not going to have environmental controls because that makes a factory cost more. So there are lots of different factors here with pollution than just you wanting to sell your shoes to the whole world. Okay, but it is a part and it is a problem associated with popular culture. And that's it. Unit 1 is over. That's culture. Now, thanks for playing. Thanks for listening and watching. If you have any questions, please send them below. I will post this on my channel this evening once I edit it a little bit. When we come back Monday, we'll start talking about language. Y'all have a great time. See you next time. Bye.